What's up, guys? We are back with another video. This time, this is the third and final deck that is by request. We are going to be covering, like I said, we need phonetic cards to pronounce these dang things. Kangee? Kangee? I don't know how to say these things, man. But we'll just call him Kang for now. But Kang, Sky Warden, is a bird commander for 5 that cares about flying creatures, and this is pretty cool. There's been a really good theme going on lately with flying creatures in white and blue. Here on EDH Rec, we see that there are 422 decks with flying tribal and then 88 decks with bird tribal. But the thing that I'm interested in, because of his effect, I don't see spirit tribal listed here, which is something that could be interesting, or even angel tribal, which could also be a deck that you could play. All angels have flying, and in white and blue you have so many white angels, it's ridiculous. But also you just also have token synergies. So with like spirits, a lot of 1/1 spirits or spirit tokens come in with flying, so they're flying 1/1 spirits. And with Kang's effect, when Kang attacking creatures with flying get +2 attack, and then whenever Kang blocking creatures with flying get +2 defense. So with this, you have a lot of options to do things where he has flying and vigilance, which is great. So if he attacks, he can still block, he does not tap. And then there are also a couple other creatures which give creature tokens vigilance and flying, which I don't even think are here, but they might not be here on this list, but I'll cover them. But there's a lot of good, interesting options that you have here. Like I said, with spirits, we covered the Millicent deck with spirit tribal. But as far as Kang goes, Kang would be a really good option when it comes to targeting things that have flying, and also angel tribal. You can also do dragons. I'm not going to get into that too much because there aren't that many white and blue dragons even mixed together. There are some really powerful ones, but there aren't too many that you have options with. But there are a lot of other things, so if you wanted to, you could even get into drakes. Drakes are in blue heavily, and they all have flying, or at least I think all blue drakes have flying, but they have some interesting effects like Thunderclap Wyvern, which is a drake which has flash flying, and other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. You have, of course, this angel, I swear, these cards, man. Skyblade, we'll just go with that. Skyblade gives other creatures with flying indestructible. Safara is how you say her name. Like I said, these cards are hard to pronounce, but anyway, you have a lot of good options. But also, like I said, with spirits, you have some options as well. So we're gonna get into more of the stats and cover these different ideas, and then cover like what we can do with this commander, because honestly, there are more options than just what's listed, but there are also some other options that may not be visible right off the bat. So let's get into it. So here we are getting into the deck with our commander, Kangee, or Kang, Sky Warden. Now the thing about Kangee, or Kang, we're just gonna call him Kang for this episode. The thing with Kang is he's pretty straightforward, but don't get locked in to the easy way to build. The easy way to build would be just going, bird tribal or flying tribal. But there's so many other ways you can play this commander. Remember that he is a 5-drop. He does have flying and vigilance, so you can attack with him every chance you get and not have to worry about, being tapped and someone attacking you and you not have a blocker. You always have a blocker if you attack with him. You just have to find ways to get him in, and there are tons of ways in white and blue, especially blue, to give him unblockable, or just to give him some form of evasion, or to keep your opponents from having a way to block him. So like you can either tap down your opponent's creatures or just make him unblockable, stuff like that, or even remove flying from your opponent's creatures, which is a way we'll get into later. But for now, looking at Kang, seeing that he gives +2 to all flying creatures on the attack end, and then +2 on the defensive end when they're blocking, really says a lot to what he can do. And as I was saying, with not taking the easy way out, going outside the box, because what you can do are a lot of things. You can go with like Angel Tribal if you want to. You could go with a small form of Dragon Tribal. There's enough dragons in white and blue, but I wouldn't really advise it unless you really know what you're doing. And then there's also other things. I mean, like, yeah, birds are there. You can go with spirits. Spirits just recently came out. You're just thinking about things that have flying, even fairies, if that's something that you're into. But the thing that I see that no one seems to be thinking about when it comes to Kang and his effect are artifacts. So we're going to look at artifacts, because while angels have really powerful creatures, like Big Avacyn, which will be up on the screen, who gives all your permanents indestructible, and then you even have Sephara, I hope I said her name right, the one that gives other flying creatures indestructible, and you have some other powerful angels too that can give like vigilance and stuff like that. Artifacts can do the same thing, and when it comes down to artifacts have a little bit of everyone. There are artifact angels, artifact dragons, artifact creatures with flying. So if you're going with artifacts, you can bring in a little bit of everything, even artifact fairies that were made. There are a lot of things that you can go with that support artifacts that also have flying. So I think that's where we're going to focus on this deck, doing a Kang artifact build that will be easy to upgrade but is worth the money. So thinking about artifacts in white and blue already has a lot of different things that can protect you and make you feel really powerful. White and blue have cards that can give you or your creatures indestructible, hexproof, flash to make them come in on your opponent's turns. White and blue also has ways to remove your opponents, or even remove yourself as a threat. They're all pretty expensive, but they are there. There are options. White and blue is a very powerful color combination. It's just not known for its speed, but it is known for its power and its control. You can even lock down your opponents, keep them from casting spells, from drawing cards, etc., etc. White and blue is, like I said, very, very powerful. But when it comes to artifacts, you can bring all that together. So thinking about that right off the bat, artifacts have so much in their toolbox. Where thinking about protection, let's start with protection. Artifacts have cards that can protect all of your artifacts and all of your permanents, because you can turn all of your permanents into artifacts as well. So cards like Darksteel Forge, which can give all of your artifacts indestructible. You have ways to search for artifacts. There are a trio of wizards, the Trophy, Trinket, Triumph mages, where they all, when they enter the battlefield, they can search for a artifact of a particular CMC. And then you also have cards that will destroy everything. So when it comes to support, like Nev's Disc, which will also be up on the screen, you have a lot of support in a lot of different ways that you can do things. But don't be overwhelmed by that, because some of them do get kind of expensive for good reason. You can just completely lock your opponents out the game with a combo like Michaud Synth Lattice and Karn. That combo will be up on the screen. Or you could even use Mimnarch with Michaud Synth Lattice, where you can just steal all of your opponent's stuff and then they have nothing left. Artifacts also have artifact lands. They also have a planeswalker that can search for artifacts, including those artifact lands. So you do have mana ramp to a degree, something like green would have. When it comes to artifacts, you're kind of just bringing it all together, and that's the kind of thing that you want when you're looking at a deck like this, where you're focusing on creatures with flying. You want to support them, and you want to search for them, and you kind of want to speed things up. So you don't want to have the advantage of playing slow, because you don't have green or red. Not having haste in red, that's not a problem for blue because you have flash. And when you have things that give you flash, like legendary creatures, artifact creatures, and even enchantments that can give you flash, you can then play your cards on your opponent's turn. So that way when it gets to your turn, they'll be ready to go and ready to attack. And then things that you're thinking about, like, well, how am I going to have the mana to do this stuff? Artifacts have that with Unwinding Clock. Unwinding Clock is like your Seedborn Muse in green, where this is going to untap your artifacts. And like I said, there are artifact lands. And then there are artifact mana rocks, which you can then untap and then have that mana on your opponent's turn, on each of your opponent's turns, if you know how to do it right. But you have these options and these utilities, so that way you don't have to worry about like high mana cost, or you don't have to worry about losing your stuff, because there are definitely ways to get it back. There are definitely ways to protect your stuff. Somebody wants to use Vandal Blast and destroy all of your artifacts. You have a card like Darksteel Forge to protect all of your mana rocks and to protect your creatures, so that way they're not going anywhere. So getting into creatures, with this deck we want to make a lot of Thopters. So Thopters are going to be 1/1 flying artifacts that will help us just amass an army. So as I was saying before, we have creatures that can give us flash. There are a couple creatures that can give all artifacts flash, or historics, which are legendary creatures as well, as well as artifacts, I should say. So we have creatures that give us flash. We have a creature like Archetype of Imagination, which can give all of our creatures flying and remove flying from our opponents. And then we also have creatures that give us protection. So we have cards like Soul of New Phyrexia, which doesn't have flying, but it does have pay 5 generic to give all of your permanents indestructible until the end of the turn. Then we also have Padim, who is a legendary creature that gives all of your artifacts hexproof. And we also have Artificers, who are like inventors, where whenever you cast a artifact spell, you can create a Thopter. And we also have a couple enchantments that do the same thing, like Thopter Spy Network, where it creates Thopters. And there's also Efficient Construction is another enchantment that creates Thopters. So there are a lot of ways to create Thopters, but when we create these Thopters, we also need a way to also give them vigilance. Like our commander King has vigilance and flying, so we need to give them vigilance. There are a couple cards that do that. We also have a creature that is not an artifact, but he's another bird creature. Aven Wind Guide gives all creature tokens flying and vigilance, which is a great card to have. One of my favorite cards from when I started playing Magic, literally when I started playing Magic. And with this, all of your Thopters will have vigilance. So going with vigilance, hexproof, indestructible, you're going to have a lot of things that you normally don't have in these colors with other creatures. So going with that, having the hexproof, the indestructible, the vigilance. I mean, there are also enchantments that give vigilance and +1/+1 to creature tokens and creatures, like Always Watching and Intangible something. They'll be up on the screen. But we want to also use these creatures to excel our deck. So as we were looking at before, we can have a way to draw cards with these Thopters. Since we're getting a whole bunch of Thopters, they're going to be attacking a little bit bigger than they normally would. We want to be able to draw cards to get more artifacts, and that's where cards like reconnaissance mission, come in handy where when they're dealing damage, because of cards like Archetype of Imagination, where our opponents will lose flying, these Thopters can just swing in, freely, and no one can block them, and you want to be able to draw cards off that. Thopter Assembly is another great creature that has flying, and when it comes in, it's going to make you more Thopters when it leaves. So you have a big Thopter that's going to make you a bunch of small Thopters, and you can do that a lot over and over. But since we're going to be making so many Thopter tokens, we can also draw cards, and that's a cool thing about that. Since they're going to be 1/1s initially, we can use something like Skull Clamp to, maybe lose 1 or 2 Thopters to draw cards to refill our hand. Because since we're going to be playing artifacts with this, going outside of the box, we're going to have a lot of utility and a lot of advantage that other colors won't have. So we're going to be playing like as if we're playing green, like as if we're playing red, as if we're playing black. We have, like I said, artifacts have everything at their disposal. So when you're thinking about this deck, don't try to limit yourself. Just try to see what you have available. So the last thing I want to talk about with this deck is upgrading it for the future, or just maybe once you get comfortable with it and you want to put some money into it and make it a lot stronger. There are a lot of really powerful artifacts, as I was alluding to before, cards like Mimnarch, who can just steal all of your opponent's artifacts, stealing their mana rocks, and if you have Mycosynth Lattice, which is another expensive card, stealing their resources, turning everything on the field into an artifact, making you stronger. There are a lot of really powerful cards. Some of them are pretty cheap, like Bronze Guardian, which will give all of your artifacts Ward 2, so that way if your opponents want to target them, they have to pay 2 additional mana to target your creatures, but he also gains the attack of the number of artifacts you have on the field, which works great with Mycosynth Lattice. Some other cards to look into for this, like I said, we have Archetype of Imagination, which gives all of our creatures flying. So something like Darksteel Colossus or Blightsteel Colossus that are hardcore game-ending creatures, and making them they're already powerful creatures, as you can see on screen, but giving them flying and removing flying from your opponents, that's another way, because Kang is going to give them a buff. Kang will be an artifact as well, so he'll have protection with Darksteel Forge, etc. Another thing you can look into is Unwinding Clock, which will untap. That's just, like I said before, that's like your Seaborn Muse. Then a card that you're just absolutely going to love in a deck like this is going to be Aetherflux Reservoir. Aetherflux Reservoir is an artifact that is a 4-drop artifact, and whenever you cast a spell, gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. The awesome thing about this card is that its other effect is pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. Now there are some other artifacts that can gain you life. I think there was one called Golem's Heart. I think it's Golem's Heart, where whenever you cast an artifact spell, you gain 1 life. White and blue are very good at gaining you life. So a card like that is another great win con that you can have to just add to the deck. Another good creature to add to the deck for ways to upgrade it is Esper Sentinel, which will be on the screen, which whenever your opponents cast their first spell each turn, you draw a card unless they pay X. For X is the power and toughness of the Esper Sentinel, which really no one ever pays the X. So, that's a good way to draw cards. Another good card to add into this deck, which may or may not be for you, but it is Medomai the Ageless. Medomai is a white-blue Sphinx legendary creature that allows you to have an extra turn. So when Medomai The Ageless deals combat damage to a player, take an extra turn, but he can't attack during extra turns. So, like I said, that's just something to think about, something that you can add in, which is pretty cool. And like, there's a bunch of ways you can go with this deck. Like I said before, like, you don't have to go with the standard route. There are also more expensive cards out there. But at least with this deck, if you like what you're playing, you like making the Thopters, making them indestructible, having hexproof, giving everything flying, taking flying away from your opponents, feeling like you're really powerful, you can start to sort of experiment and get into other things. I mean, white has one of the most powerful protection spells ever in Teferi's Protection, which will be up on the screen also. But that card is also, like I said, really pricey, but it is a great upgrade, but only if you really need it. In a deck like this, what we've built, you don't really need it, but you know, it can help. White blue artifacts also have a lot of mana ramp. Like I said before, other than just mana rocks, you also have cards like Archaeomancer's Map, which is a way to get you planes from your deck to your hand, and then allows you to play lands onto the battlefield if your opponents control more lands than you. There's also cards like Smothering Tithe, which are expensive at the moment, are pretty good. It's something that's going to make you more artifacts, so that Bronze Guardian will have an exceptional amount of attack from the treasure tokens that you're going to get, and then that's going to give you more mana ramp as well. And then there is one more card that I would like to talk about that is also pretty expensive, but is definitely worth it, and that is Consecrated Sphinx. Consecrated Sphinx is going up in price. Man, it is going up in price, but in a deck like this, it's definitely worth it. Whenever your opponents draw a card, you draw 2 cards, and man, trust me, everyone will hate you. I mean, don't worry about the high cost of some of the cards, because there are ways to cheat them out. Like I said, with Michael Synth Lattice, which is another one of those expensive cards I was mentioning, you have another card like Michael Synth Golem, which gives all of your creatures affinity for artifacts. Affinity for artifacts means that for each artifact that you have on the field, reduce the generic mana cost of the creatures that are in your hand by the amount of artifacts that are on the field. So if you have 7 artifacts, that removes 7 generic mana from any creature that's in your hand. Affinity for artifacts is a great card that you definitely want to have. But like I said, there are a lot of ways to just cheat out stuff. So when you have affinity for artifacts with Michael Synth Golem, for every creature that's in your hand, you can play cards like Steel Hellkite, which is 6 generic mana. Or you could play the Soul of New Phyrexia, which is 6. You know, you'll be able to play those for free. Thopter Assembly, which is another 6-drop artifact creature, you can just play it for free, because as long as you have more than 6 artifacts on the field, you can play those cards for free without having to pay anything. So like I said, there's a lot of upside to a deck like this, where you don't want to just lock yourself into one way of thinking, taking the easy way out, but you can definitely look at other things to support what you're doing. Like I said, there are fairies, you know, that have flying, and those fairies can even give your creatures benefits. There are dragons, there are angels, there are sphinxes. You know, there are a couple sphinxes. There's like Sharding Sphinx, which is a good sphinx to have, which has whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 Thopter, and then if you make copies of that Sharding Sphinx, it can really get out of hand. It's not an expensive card. Sharding Sphinx is not expensive, but cards that clone it, or artifacts like Helm of the Host, are kind of pricey. So, you know, it's like, while they're good strategies, you know, there's definite room to improve, but the improvement is worth the price. You know, if you really want to go all out and you start to love this deck, that's something that you can do to just have fun, or just to make it more powerful, or to just make it faster. Like I said, you have tons of options. And that'll be it for me for this deck list. If you want to see something that I put together, it'll be on Arcadeck. The link is in the description below. I made a artifact deck that is pretty easy to build, very easy to upgrade. If you just want like something to start with, or just to get some ideas, or to see the things that I was talking about, maybe see the interactions, there are definitely ways to take this deck above and beyond just something basic like flying or bird tribal. I think the artifacts is the way to go with it. For me personally, I love artifacts, but with the way artifacts are with this build, with flying creatures being the focus, you can go into infinite mana with cards like Basalt Monolith, and there are other things that you can do, but just the upside when it comes to white blue artifacts is very high. If you want to take this into a stacks deck and make it competitive, you can do that. You can add, well, not competitive as in like CEDH, but competitive as in just like higher powered. If you want to take it to like a high-end 7 or a strong 8, or even like a pretty decent 9 power tier, you can do that because you're in those colors that allow you to do that. So there's always upside to it. Kang also can go into a bunch of other decks that support that same idea of having flying creatures, like I mentioned before: angels, fairies, dragons, artifacts, etc. There are places where Kang can fit into those decks as well. So I think starting off with a commander like Kang is really good for people who are just getting into EDH, who want to experience something, who will have options, who will always be able to upgrade this deck. And that's a big thing, is always being able to upgrade the deck with the times can keep you in the game, because you'll always get new tech, you'll always get new creatures, or new support, new artifacts, new enchantments, new birds, something new flying creatures that add something to the mix that maybe you wanted, or maybe you didn't see. I mean, heck, there's even a flying shark that gives you +1 counters for drawing cards. Like, it's Magic is crazy. So so yeah, definitely have fun, enjoy it, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.